Have you ever wondered why dysfunction has repeated in your family? Maybe you've heard from your parents or your grandparents how life was for them, how they experienced dysfunction. And then you can see very clearly how those experiences were passed down to the next generation, affecting you. I've been on my healing journey from the experiences of growing up with a mother who struggled with alcoholism, and I've thought a lot about my family and how that dysfunction has repeated generation after generation. Today, I'd like to share what I've learned from all of the books I've read, all of the research about why this is. Why does dysfunction keep repeating in your family? If you're new here, hi, I'm Jody. I write about how to take good care of yourself from scratch. If you grew up in dysfunction like me, this is new. So I share what I'm learning along the way. And I have a free guide with the details of what helped me when I started on this path to create a life I love. And it's called The Blueprint You Never Got, and it's free and it's linked in the description of this video if you'd like to learn more about that. There are several reasons why dysfunction repeats generation after generation. And at the top of that list is it's what was your normal. And that makes sense. When you grow up in dysfunction, whether it was addiction or substance use disorder, poverty, whatever was the cause of the dysfunction in a family, that's what you know. That's what, right from the get-go, becomes your normal. And you don't know that it's abnormal compared to healthier families, healthier family units, until you are out there more in the world and you experience what those families are like, what those healthier environments are. And it's only then that your eyes are open to it. If it's what is your normal, it makes sense that you would repeat that. It's what your programming was set to. It's what feels familiar and safe. And when you have that from such an early age, it really becomes embedded in your heart and your mind as normal. So that makes sense that it would repeat. Secondly, that attachment to the dysfunction gets like hardwired. For example, hypervigilance is something that I struggle with. It's one of my greatest challenges. And I know that came from my experiences coping with the effects of my mom's drinking and all the chaos that surrounded it. And I also know that she herself struggles with hypervigilance. And that's from her experience growing up with an alcoholic father herself and all of the negative experiences that she had as a child. Her father passed away when she was 11 from health complications from alcoholism. She grew up in poverty with 7 siblings. There was a ton of very tough stuff going on. So my mother is always hypervigilant, just like me, bracing for the next terrible thing to happen and never really being able to relax. Unfortunately, my mother has not found a way to overcome that. So I can see very clearly that intense attachment to hypervigilance, that this coping skill that we developed is, why it gets repeated, because we are experiencing things that cause us to develop those coping skills. And without proactive therapy and working on kind of going back or eliminating that survival skill, it's a part of us. We are attached to it. And third, in the dysfunction that we experience, we develop coping mechanisms. Children are so brilliant and resilient and can easily develop a way to cope with whatever the chaos or the dysfunction is going on around them. They're actually quite skilled. So we learn these coping mechanisms. Maybe for you, it was shutting down and becoming quiet and not being noticed and being under the radar because that's what kept you safe. Maybe you had an abusive mother or father, and if you were anything other than that, it made it worse for you. Maybe you got in trouble, you became the focus, it became unsafe. So you learned to get small and shrivel into a corner. That was a brilliant survival strategy and coping mechanism. And maybe you still have that. Maybe you're walking around as an adult still feeling very small and putting yourself in a corner and never speaking how you feel or standing up for yourself because it was a coping mechanism that you developed as a child. And when you grow up and you have kids and you live that way, you teach your kids that's the way to live. You are modeling that behavior and that dysfunctional thinking to them. Another reason why dysfunction gets passed down is if the emotions are not processed, if the pain that you experienced in that dysfunction as a child doesn't get processed, you don't start healing, you don't know how to be any other way. You don't know how to live any other way but the way you learned as a child. That dysfunction is fully hardwired because you haven't learned any other way of being. And the next one is pretty painful. It's difficult to process, but it is so real. And that is that people who grew up in dysfunctional families tend to seek out more dysfunction. This is the saddest part of the whole reality, in my opinion. When you grow up in dysfunction, that is all you know. It is the patterns. It is the familiar way of life. It's all interconnected with love. It's such a messy, intertwined ball. That's what feels normal. That's what feels like life. That's what feels like family, like love. People who grow up like this then tend to seek out people who are going to help replicate that life because that feels familiar, that feels safe. Maybe you look for partners who are emotionally unavailable or have substance use disorders or are constantly causing drama and chaos and stress for you because it feels like what you experience with your parents in your environment, you're drawn to it. It feels all comfy and cozy, like a warm blanket that it's fuzzy and you love. And the other reason is the dysfunction is full on programmed into who you are. When you grow up as a kid experiencing dysfunction, you absorb it like a sponge. It is when you're being programmed, you're being wired of how you think and behave, and it is just fully embedded in who you are. That's why it's so important to recognize this, to take a pause and say, why did this dysfunction repeat in my family? And you'll probably see very clearly the aspects of your grandparents, maybe the stories of your great-grandparents and your parents, and see those patterns repeating. It's just incredibly sad that dysfunction does repeat like this in families. And another area that is pretty interesting is intergenerational trauma. So this is referring to pretty intense dysfunction. This is intense trauma that is repeated in families. Let's say there was significant substance use. That, of course, causes significant trauma for the children growing up in that environment. Those lasting effects can get passed on generation to generation. Or maybe there was some significant trauma in the family with war or whatever the experience was. That can take a very long time for those effects to start to get out of the family system. But I have to say, with all that being said, if all that I have learned and seen in my own family, I am extremely optimistic about the future and the ability that we have to stop the passing of dysfunction generation after generation. Because unlike all other previous generations, we now have such access to information and resources around the world to know so much more about what you're experiencing and to recognize what is healthy, what's not healthy, what you need to do to heal. I am a perfect example of that. In my family, this dysfunction, centered mostly around substance use disorders, addiction, has passed on in my family for multiple generations, just like it has in millions and millions of other families across North America, across the world. But because now over the last 20, 30 years, personal growth, mental health awareness, trauma recovery, there's so many abundant resources available, the books, the podcasts, videos like this with people sharing their personal stories and information. Now more than ever in any previous generation, we have access to this. So I feel so proud and so excited to be helping to break the cycle of dysfunction in my own family, to stop the cycle of substance use disorders, of addiction, and recognize it's the sadness that has been the reality in my family, but then feel so proud that I'm part of that change because I've put in the work for education to understand what happened in my family exactly, how I was affected, and the therapy, self-care, education, everything that I've done to work on myself and in healing and feeling better, having a life I truly love. That has only been possible because of the time and age that we are living in today. And I was that coupled with the fact that I happen to have a grandmother and some other people in my life who helped inspire me to focus on personal growth and healing. And it was the combination of those resources and a few people who were helpful in my journey that I've been able to stop this passing of dysfunction in my family. So I feel very hopeful for you too. And I hope you do too, because now we have so much available. And it's a matter of really putting the time and energy into absorbing it and focusing on believing that you deserve a better life, that your family, your children, your siblings, your family deserves to stop this cycle of dysfunction in your families. And if you've had that intergenerational trauma, the really intense dysfunction, even more so. I hope that you and your family are able to finally break that cycle. I have that blueprint you never got as a guide with the simple starting points that I used in my healing journey to start to figure out, what do I need to do to take the next steps to feel better, to have a better life, and to stop this dysfunction from passing on in my family for yet another generation. I have more videos on hypervigilance and other aspects of healing that I linked in the description of this video that I think will be helpful for you. I wish you well on your journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.